Today we'll be going over problem 2 from chapter 12. We are given information in this problem that we'll use to compute the company's cash flow adequacy ratio and interpret this ratio to understand why banks and loaning companies are interested in knowing this ratio. On its most recent statement of cash flows, a company reported net cash provided by operating activities of $12 million. Its capital expenditures for the same year were $2 million. A note to the financial statements indicated that total amount of debt that would mature over the next 5 years was $20 million. So the first thing to look at before we can even get into computing the company's cash flow adequacy ratio is understanding what this ratio is and what the parts of this consist of. So a cash flow adequacy ratio measures whether the cash generated by a company's operations are enough to pay for its other expenses. So and this ratio is shown by the net cash flow from operating activities minus capital expenditures all over the average annual debt maturing over 5 years. So this is all the parts that are present in this ratio. The first thing we want to do is understand the net cash flow from operating activities. This refers to the relative change in a company's cash position from one period to the next created by operating expenses. A capital expenditure is money spent by a business organization on acquiring or maintaining fixed assets. So the first thing we want to look at is pulling out these two things. So the net cash flow from operating activities is given to us in the form of $12 million. So we're going to take our $12 million and subtract it by our capital expenditures of $2 million all over our $20 million that is maturing divided by the 5 years that it's maturing. So here we have our equation set up, and this is going to give us our ratio. So on the top, we have our 10 million over our 4 million done by computing what we have right here on the bottom already, which gives us a ratio of 2.5. So for part 1 of this question, the company's cash flow adequacy ratio is 2.5. The second part will allow us to understand this ratio and go into it a little deeper. So, if you were a banker considering loaning money to this company, why would you be interested in knowing its cash flow adequacy ratio? Would you feel comfortable making a loan based on the ratio you computed in part 1? Explain your answer. So the first thing we want to do when understanding this ratio is what this ratio means and what this number of 2.5 indicates. So a higher ratio, which is typically greater than 1.0, is preferred by investors or creditors or any other analysis because it means a company can cover its current short-term liabilities and still have earnings left over. Companies with the higher or untrending operating cash flow are generally considered to be like in good financial health. So why do bankers and loaners care about this when they're looking at whether they should invest in it? Because they're concerned with the company's ability to meet its principal, interest, and obligation. Capital expenditures on new plant and equipment are a necessity for most companies, so analysts are concerned with the availability of cash to repay debts after a company has replaced and upgraded their long-term assets. So this number of 2.5, although is greater than 1.0, is not a great number that we would want to see. Like, because of this number is only a 2.5, I would suggest that bankers and loaners compare it to other ratios, whether it's ratios from prior years and ratios with competitors. Because what this ratio shows us is that this company has generated enough cash from operations to not only make necessary capital expenditures, but also to cover its average annual debt maturity over the next 5 years. However, if a company has a higher ratio, then they are in better standing. So because this ratio is very mediocre, I would say that loaners and investors would need to be more precautious about what they are about to invest in. I hope this concludes my brief over chapter 12, problem 2. I hope there are no further questions and I hope everything is understood. Thank you.